Hey everybody, welcome to a special fall episode of PCH Pit. Typically at this point we're getting ready for grits and we're maybe talking about those teams coming up. But as you guys know, COVID-19 happened and I guess we have egrits, but we definitely don't have the same in-person off-season events that we're used to. But before we get into all of that, I do want to just start on our usual disclaimer. So any views or opinions shared on the show are solely that of the individual contributor and do not reflect the views of PCH Pit, any FRC team, First, Georgia First, or any of their affiliates and sponsors. So Anupam, can you give our show a quick introduction?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, the idea behind this show is to serve as an FRC talk show that focuses primarily on the Peachtree District. We're going to be talking about a variety of topics, so don't be surprised if you see us drop some hot takes. Ultimately, though, we're hoping to provide some entertaining and engaging discussions in our community.
All right, Anupam, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So my name is Anupam Goli. I am the head coach for Team 1746, Team Auto, out of Forsyth Central High School in Cumming, Georgia.
I'm Kellen Hill, team mentor for 1746, Team Auto.
All right.
My name is Kyle Fender, and I am the head coach, one of the head coaches for Circuit Runner Robotics.
I'm Brian Carlson, a mentor with Ignite Robotics.
And my name is Sunny. I'm a former FRC mentor and current FRC enthusiast. And so here we go. We're going to jump right into it. But before we get super into it, I just want to do a sanity check, see how you guys are doing and how your teams are doing, right? So first, we're going to start at just like an individual level, right? So Anupam, how the past kind of 6-ish months been for you?
Well, start with the season getting canceled, right? So Team Auto competed at Gainesville, and we had a lot of fun there. We fell just short of gold, and we had a lot of improvements in mind, and we were working through those, but then COVID kind of canceled everything, and our momentum kind of went with that as well. So me personally, that's when the burnout kind of set in. I didn't realize how burnt out I was from that season until COVID happened, and with COVID going on, I just kind of had to take some time for myself. So we were doing virtual school, and when I wasn't doing school, I kind of got into some hobbies of my own, mainly road biking, and I bought an inflatable kayak as well and took that up to Lake Lanier a couple of times. And that's where I thought, other than staying home, the next safest place to be was just like outside where nobody else was, right? So that's kind of what I did over the course of this pandemic. And of course, now school has begun in person for us. So things have returned to normal-ish, as normal as they can be with social distancing and masks. But that's kind of where I've been at.
Mm-hmm. So Kellen, you want to bounce off that, being 1746 co-mentors and all that?
Yeah, like Anupam, I remember the week or two following then Gainesville. Obviously, COVID was starting to shut a lot of things down. I remember making a concerted effort to try squeaking into one of the week three events.
Yeah.
Just for trying to sneak in one more competition before things shut down. So, I remember that surge, but obviously things fell off a bit from there. But yeah, I've been a college student for the last couple of years for going back for another degree. But yeah, jumped into virtual classes at that point. Picked up some projects over the summer for working on restoring an old motorcycle. Another hobby I picked up was doing some baking. So I've been making a lot of desserts and things. So making robots at one point in time and desserts at another. But yeah, currently going back to school for the fall semester, but plugging along.
Cool. Good to know. All right, Kyle, you're up.
So funny thing about that same weekend where all the events were canceled, that same weekend, the weekend previous, I had just literally gotten back from a wedding up in North Carolina. And I drove back when everything started here in Georgia. And I was sick as a dog. So quite literally in my bed and whatever else, didn't know what it was. Turns out COVID. So I basically went through right about 2+ weeks of, the normal COVID symptoms, everything else. Luckily, I'm blessed that it wasn't bad. It was just, a lot of the normal stuff with lethargy, all that stuff. But I'm fully recovered now. From there, it's just been a lot of work with a couple things going on in the country. I'm starting to pursue a couple more projects with Georgia First to kind of go more into content creation and things like that. But then on the other side, along with my work stuff, getting more into biking, getting back more into exercising, but then also getting into home renovation DIY stuff. So pretty much that, as well as figuring out different streaming setups. So that's been a pretty fun thing to do.
So how are you feeling now? Are you feeling pretty good? You feel like you've recovered fully?
So I'm pretty recovered. The thing that I had to do, which is why I'm glad that I was able to take up, went back to biking, because I've loved biking for my entire life, is to get back a lot of that lung capacity that they do. It is a real thing that does become diminished sometimes after a round of COVID. Right. Being able to get on my bike, being able to go through kind of rounds to kind of increase my ability, like my breathing ability in general. Mm-hmm. So, in general, I'm pretty much good to go. There's been a couple of times where my heart rate's been probably normally elevated a little bit more than the used to resting heart rate, but other than that, it's been pretty okay in terms of recovery.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. All right, so we're going to move on. Brian, how's it going?
Going pretty good. Fortunately, I have not had any issues with COVID, but I have bronchitis. So I've been coughing for the past 6 months. So definitely get some strange looks when I'm out and about, but fortunately, it's not COVID for me. What have I been doing? I started out doing stuff with helping fight COVID. There's a 4 makerspace alliance called Atlanta Beats COVID that produced a whole bunch of PPE. I think we did about 6,000-7,000 shields. I know Kellen helped 3D print some of the frames for us. Also, my wife has been doing the baking thing, so sourdough breads. But what I've been doing mostly is outdoor stuff. Basically, took out my front lawn down to dirt, took down 5 trees, reseeded front yard. I'm in the process of doing my backyard now. So, basically long projects. That's about it.
All right, that's amazing. Thank God I don't own my current living situation. I feel like it'd be like walls are down, the bathroom's out. We're doing everything. Everything's going to take 6 weeks. Don't worry about it. All right. So my update, I'm actually in college right now, similar to Kellen. So things went virtual, and then I did a virtual internship, which was interesting, but it meant I could stay in my apartment. And I didn't have to move across the country, so that was nice. And now I'm back in school, not going to Georgia Tech, but I'm still going to Georgia Tech. And so that's sort of my life at the moment, just sitting here for the past 6 months. That's what I've been doing, just right here. So, now I kind of want to pivot a little bit away from the individual and check in on your teams, especially how your teams are doing right now, right? So are you guys able to meet right now? What are your plans for the fall? Are you going to try and do something big, or are you guys just slowly getting up and going? And I have written down here initial plans for the spring, but why don't we wait on that? Because we're going to get into it here and there. So just how are you guys doing right now, team-wise? Are you able to meet? And what are kind of your plans for the fall at a high level? So we're going to start with the 1746 boys.
All right. So Kellen's been helping us a lot with the virtual meetings. We've pretty much been full virtual, starting in the summer, starting with engaging our leadership, trying to plan out what projects and trainings we could maybe do virtually. But Forsyth County Schools has started in person, and they have resumed in person clubs and sports and activities. So now we're kind of looking at like how we could maybe safely resume something kind of in person. One of the challenges we faced was it's kind of hard to engage people virtually, especially when you're trying to train them and when you're trying to have that kind of excitement than first related projects usually bring. So I don't know if Kellen, if you want to talk more about how we've been doing virtually.
Yeah, we've been a little bit hit or miss on attendance for virtual meetings. Happy to see that we've been able to make some progress. I wouldn't say it's all that comparable to what we'd be able to accomplish during like normal in-person meetings, but it's cool to see some enthusiasm on those returning members to say like, all right, I know the situation's changed, but what can we still accomplish given this set of circumstances?
Mhm.
But yeah, like Anupam said, now that we've gotten the schools allowed us to meet in person, we're trying to do the best we can to maintain virtual meetings just for a safety factor. But obviously, at some point, there are points you'll have to work on the robot or fix things along the way, or it's hard to teach certain skills online. So we're trying to figure out how to start working around minimal in-person meetings or very focused in-person meetings such that we can get those trainings done and given to those new students, but maintaining focus on doing it safely.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. So like outside of the trainings, do you guys have any other plans for the fall, or are you guys not thinking that far ahead at all?
We've been having some conversations in our weekly. We'll have a couple of different weekly meetings for various sub teams as well as a full team group, but we'll have some conversations as we kind of keep seeing updates from First HQ and Georgia First on kind of where we want to go with the season. I think that kind of tunnel vision or optimist's viewpoint is kind of looking at, Georgia First is looking at hosting events. That means we get to play in a competition. So what can we do with our robot to get it up and running and doing its thing to be able to compete in the spring? So we kind of got that little light at the end of the tunnel kind of thing, looking for how we can compete, because that's one of the most exciting parts about First, obviously.
Yeah.
But,
all right. Sounds good. All right, next up, Brian, tell us about Ignite. How are you guys doing?
Doing pretty good. Being a community team, we have a little different situation, right? We don't have a school to sort of lean on as far as where our policy should be as far as meeting. So we actually have a COVID committee from some mentors and adults. We got some people in the medical field that are parents and mentors, and same got some people in the public health field. So right now we kind of have a broad standard for what we're going to be doing. We're not meeting right now. We're doing virtual, and I'm not sure we're going to be meeting for a while. So at this point, we're looking at sort of some of the stuff that Georgia First has put out, First HQ put out as far as the different challenges, and seeing how we can sort of dovetail that in with what we're doing with our training, and sort of looking at that kind of stuff. Haven't really talked about what we want to do for the robots. I know we'd like to make changes, but depending on when we can meet, that's going to drive what we can do, because if we're not going to be able to meet till January or later, that might be an issue, right? If we can meet sooner, then great, we can make more changes. But right now, we're sort of trying to get our feet underneath us. Not being a high school, one of the impacts we've had was, trying to do some recruitment. So we got some students in, but we're probably going to take a little bit of maybe 5 students less than last year. So that's kind of where we're at, moving forward with that.
All right. So like the whole taking 5 students less than last year, is that a conscious decision, or was that more just a result of not having that many students coming through?
It's just more of we could. So our big recruiting event is usually at the end of the school year, right? Mm-hmm. So all those 8th graders are going to rise up and stuff like that. We really try to sort of flood the different places we have for marketing and say, here's what's coming up. We did a virtual one this year. We did get a few students. But last year I think we got almost 15. And I think this year we got maybe 3, 4, 5.
Mhm.
So
No,
it's going to be the nature of what it is for right now.
yeah. Okay. Sounds good. All right. Last but not least, we got 1002. You guys had a pretty good, Kyle, you guys had a pretty good looking robot that we never got to see. And I think like last season or like the past 6 months have been kind of exciting for you guys, but I think like towards the end of last season, you guys also got like a new build space from your school, right?
Yes.
So I guess just like share like what's going on with that.
Mm-hmm.
I know you guys have done a little bit of a rebrand, which you can maybe pitch here.
Oh gosh.
And just tell us about y'all's plans going forward.
Yeah. So I think towards March, obviously, we just never got to compete. The first season basically ended right before we were supposed to attend our first event. So from there, it kind of started our off season. We immediately switched into off season mode. From there, we got very lucky. A big focus for our coaching group. So we've actually changed up the entire structure of our organization so that we officially have head coaches now who are the designated, leading forces for the team. So myself, Zach Cloud, and Cameron Huggins, we 3 operate as head coaches of Circuit Runner Robotics, and we focus on the 3 different competition teams. And so from there, a big part of our focus has been working on process and culture. And so a big part of it was, all 3 of us are very sports minded. So a big part of our focus was recruit. And so a big part of that was working on the rebrand, which we moved from the old traditional circuit runner back from 2003 all the way up until 2020. And we've moved now into a more modern glitch theme to kind of show a couple different elements that it's the same elements of what makes circuit runners, but now we're embracing a whole new modern theme of who we are as an organization. So from there, our numbers in terms of the club, last year we were right about at 30. This year we're at 50 right now. 50 students between our 3 competition teams. And so we're actually seeing a lot more from that recruitment push and that marketing change with our brand. And then also in terms of our process, one thing that we did probably about, I'd probably say a couple weeks after everything happened with COVID is one of our mentors, Ben Sterling, along with what he's done with the city of Sandy Springs. With the city of Sandy Springs, developed a COVID policy for us in terms of how we would embrace going into our competition season in 2020 and 2021, and how it lines up with what the CDC is recommending, as well as what Cobb County School District is recommending. So going into this year, what it's looking like is as we go into November, that's going to be the big lynch point, since that is when Cobb County high schools are going to start going from virtual to the decision to, if you want to be able to go in person. So from that point, we're also making some of the decisions on, we've built out our basic budget for our new build space, which was the old auditorium. So now we're going to be leveling it to a certain point, basically putting in our build space for FRC and FTC there, and figuring out we basically figured out for the most part, okay, how many students are going to be able to be in there at one time? How are we going to handle certain items in terms of manufacturing? Can we kind of outsource a little bit of that to help to minimize the amount of student-to-student interaction or student-to-mentor interaction? So from there, a big part of our 2020 year has been refinement of our process and refinement of our culture, which, is a big part to our recruitment push, not just from our students, but also from our mentoring core. So we basically have a mentoring crew of probably about 10, I believe right now 12 people. So we pushed hard.
I'm gonna have to take some notes from you, Kyle, especially for like that facility. Something that we've always had trouble with is getting more space than we currently have. We're kind of we have
never enough space.
Yeah,
never enough space.
We have a decent sized lab, but
exactly. We're gonna take a look. We have a couple of our guys who Ben obviously has experience with building out auditoriums and everything else for audio and visual, so he has that part handled. We have Noah Minter, who handles a lot of the machine and everything else, so he's handling how we grade off the actual floors and how we do that correctly, and then just working with Cobb County for items like building out our lighting systems, everything else, as well as working with a couple of our parents and Zach Cloud to actually build out computer labs that are not just in-person computer labs, but also virtual computer labs. So all of our CADing computers, programming computers are going to be available to be accessible from home. So that's a big part of what we're trying to go into for 2020 is we want to make sure that we provide the right resources in terms of human capital and as well as actual material capital to make sure that our season is going to be successful, whether in person or virtual.
All right. Sounds good. Yeah, it sounds like you guys have some momentum coming into this next period. So hopefully you guys can capitalize.
Oh, definitely.
But before we get into some of our discussions, I do want to provide a bit of a season update, right? So let me pull this up and let me share my screen. I'm talking very slowly so that I have time. Okay. Can you guys see the slides here?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So we're going to start with the updates that First actually has. And this is a slide that I've changed multiple times because it seems like every week First is adding something or releasing something. So just take that with a grain of salt. The first thing is about registration, right? So this time registration is $2,000, but that's only for the virtual competitions. And teams have an option for a $450 NASA grant that's available to everybody, right? So I don't know the strings attached to that grant, so please read it carefully. But I thought that was pretty cool of NASA to offer that support to all the teams. And the next thing about registration is that the $2,000, I don't think it covers the in-person events. So you might be excited it's cheaper now, but I wouldn't be personally very surprised if First came along as you can do in-person events, but it's going to be the full $5,000, right? So that'd be interesting. First did announce these few virtual competitions. So the game design challenge, which relatively straightforward, build your favorite water game. You have the innovation challenge, which to me was interesting because they specifically said to build a business model. So not necessarily build a prototype of a technology, but build a business model that can be applied to a real world challenge. And then they also have the infinite recharge at home. It's kind of like the skills challenges that we see in the VEX competitions, right? So that was interesting. And the other thing that I found that was very interesting was that the traditional awards that we see at events, like imagery, creativity, quality, things like that, are actually now tied into the virtual competitions, right? So I don't know what that means for when we show up in person, right? So will it be that if you show up in person, all this is still virtual? So that'll be interesting to see. And they did say that teams will be grouped into, the same number that they typically compete in. So it doesn't mean that you're doing a game design challenge versus everybody in the world at the same time. I think it'll just mean you're doing it with maybe 20 to 30 other teams, hopefully. So, these are the high level things we've gotten from First so far. Hopefully we'll learn more in the next few days.
I'd be curious for those groupings. Sorry to jump in, but I'd be curious for those groupings if they'll do those by normal districts, so you're grouped with teams in your district, or if they'd be global groupings. I think that would be an interesting way for some potential interaction amongst like give you a little bit of the world's vibe to just have you going head to head with some teams from around the world instead of teams from next door. But
Mhm.
it should be interesting.
Yeah, that will be interesting. Another thing is like I hope they do these groupings like with a little bit of intelligence, like not to be like call them out or anything, but like if it's like 1746, 4910, Walton, you guys are all in the same group, you know, that's like a stacked group, and then you have another group with like, you know, just all like regular team, you know. I hope they spread around some of the talent and get like kind of balanced groups. So, but yeah, so this is what we know right now. We do know that FIRST intends to make the decision on virtual and in-person events closer to January. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But speaking of in-person events,
I guess one more item of note on that last item. Sorry again for jumping in. Is
no
that
problem.
I do believe it is later, or this upcoming week is when actual FIRST registration opens up.
Yeah.
Correct.
So I'd be curious if and when any more updates will pop up. But again, I know it's a significant deal to kind of jump in for doing that registration when there's not too much clarity on exactly what the season's going to look like. So
can we jump in? I apologize to jump in. Can we talk holistically for FIRST in general? How many teams do you think are just basically going to say like, I'm out for 2020 at this point?
So I'm going to pause on that because that's one of our talking points after all these details. All right. So we're going to get there. So we're going to move on to Georgia FIRST updates. So Georgia FIRST is apparently still trying to do in-person events, right? What they're picturing right now is 8 one-day events, right? So 4 close to Atlanta. What they've said is in Marietta, Gwinnett area, but we're not 100% sure. And 4 in South Georgia. And what they said in the MAC meeting was it'd be closer to Perry, Georgia.
Yeah, they're actually, Connie was on another call with us CTAE teachers, and she said that they're actually working the contracts out to book the venue at Perry, Georgia for that full 9-day span.
Yeah.
What that means, it's llama time.
It is llama time.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry, I was just going to say they were very or Connie was very insistent in the MAC meeting that with whatever happens, Georgia FIRST wants to be ready with a venue. So being able to contract both of those out is really important to them.
Yeah. So speaking of those 9 days, I think what FIRST is going to, or what Georgia FIRST is trying to do is they're trying to rent a venue for 9 days so that they can play 2 events on one weekend and they can play 2 events on the following weekend in that area, right? So pretty much means that if you're in the Atlanta area and you're going to the Atlanta events, they're going to be on back-to-back weekends. So 2 events the first weekend, 2 events the next weekend, and then the South Georgia events will be on another consecutive weekends, either earlier or later. I don't think that was made clear, right?
Yeah, I don't think they said the specific timeline, just that it's going to be 2 weekends.
Yeah,
I think they were looking at March and April, right?
Yeah, they're still trying to go. It looks like general timeline, even though FIRST timeline has expanded to July. They want to stick to what is normal since we don't want to mess up the normal school timeline for these students.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one thing that I found interesting was that they said that teams can go back to back. So like you can play on the same weekend, both of your events. And I think they also said that if you do that, you wouldn't have to like load out and like pack up your stuff and bring it back the next day. So for me, that was an intriguing thing to kind of pull out here. The event capacity stuff is pretty interesting. So you have 18 teams at all the events, including district championships. So that's going to be a whole thing. So they talked about maximum of 6 students plus 2 adults per team, right? And all judging related to anything that needs to be judged. So chairman's award, engineering inspiration, all that stuff will happen virtually, right? So no judging at the actual event. And the last thing here was, during the MAC meeting, I think Connie specifically called out that there might be new game piece or like a new additional game piece maybe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to put this out there because I think it was interesting for her to call that out. I know Kellen has some like comments on that, but
I've got a gut feeling that it's going to be the exact same game. I think it's similar to like what they'll usually do for like 2016. They said, oh, we might change the boulder amount for world champs just if we need to tweak it. So I think they're just kind of keeping that option open. That should they need to tweak something for the game, they might. But my guess is since there were only 2 weeks of competitions, that we're gonna see the same game.
Yeah, I mean, my thing about the game piece, and let's get all the cameras. So, like, for everybody's reference, those are all the details that we kind of know at the moment. Everything's very not set in stone. So, like, things are still shifting. Obviously, we won't know in-person events concretely until January. So, this is what we know for now. But I think this is a much rosier picture than, like, I was expecting at least to like have events, to have this plan put together. So that's interesting. But for the new game pieces, and I'm going to stop sharing so you can see all of our beautiful faces.
Oh, wow. Beautiful faces. Okay.
For the new game piece, it wouldn't surprise me if there's like a new additional game piece, right? So that if you can play with the current power cells or whatever they're called, you would be okay, and your design is unaltered, and you wouldn't need to do it. But if they introduce like a disc or like a tote or something, they're like, "Hey, carry this tote around the field for X." That.
No. We're not doing recycle rush. No, they're not conning us like that. Come on.
You got to fill the tote with a bunch of power cells and create a battery.
And then throw it into the toggle.
I will drop kick that thing. If I'm emceeing, I'm just gonna take that tote and just drop kick it wherever else. No, we're not doing that to students this year. No.
I appear to have triggered something in Kyle.
Yeah, no, listen, 2015, 20. Oh.
Hey, if I'm being fair, right? 2015's game would actually be perfect for a year like COVID because you don't have to interact with the other team. You could do it all at home, remotely.
Socially distant alliances.
Yeah.
No. Kidding me. Oh.
All right.
Yeah, I'm curious if the new game piece might be more for the at-home challenge and not actually the game, because if you're waiting till January to figure out if you're going to have a season, I'm not sure they want to put a lot of stuff that might really affect a competition robot, where you're not going to be meeting a full, even if we're meeting, right? We're not going to be meeting like a normal build season. So they're going to want to really make it, I think, it's easier for the teams to sort of transition into it in person, and maybe just the at home would have a different game piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe. It's interesting.
The one tweak I could think of was like the color wheel. I know there were a couple of events out there that got a little bit of use out of it for actually putting in enough power cells during a match to access that portion of the game. But I think that's one of the hardest things as a game designer, is being able to design a game that's playable at week 1, as well as at Einstein level by the time you get to championship. So, yeah, I'd be curious what the game design committee gleaned from those 2 weeks of samples that they were able to grab, and if they felt like anything was worth changing.
Well,
to that, but.
I mean, it's kind of proven through one of the virtual challenges. It looks like they're out of ideas at this point. Like, they're like, you know what we're gonna do? You know what? We're going to crowdsource our next game. And by crowdsource means we're going to steal your ideas.
What's the over-under a number of water game designs?
Oh, we can do the math on that right now. Like, let's just go ahead for memes. I think we're going to, let's go. The line is like 400. Okay. 400, because it's going to be.
While Kyle does that, we're going to go ahead and move on. And I think before we get too deep into like the over-unders on the season, I think there is a very pressing question that a lot of teams are asking themselves is, should they even try to compete this year, right? And And I think that breaks down two ways. Is one, do you try to show up in person if that happens? And two is, do you want to deal with this virtual stuff, right? Like, assuming that in person doesn't happen and all you have is the virtual competitions, is that something you want to do with your team, right? So I just want to toss that out there. Whoever wants to take it first, you can.
So
What do you guys think?
I think especially the virtual skills challenge could be something that teams find themselves. One, like, you want your team to continue to, like, do something, right? You don't want your team to completely die, because when things kind of get back to normal-ish, you want to have some sort of momentum. So I think it's important to do something. And that's where I think doing the skills challenge could help teams kind of work on their skills where they're soft at. So if you maybe struggled with programming, that virtual skills challenge could be a way for you to work on those programming skills.
Yeah.
Or, like, if you're trying to improve your, like, business team's performance and get more of, like, some structured organization, doing those the challenge to come up with an innovative solution, would really help with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so, like, my thing about competing is, like, I think it's going to be very, very difficult. I mean, I'll go ahead and say it. I think it's going to be impossible. I think it's going to be impossible to sort of capture the excitement and attraction of a in-person event, right? So if, like, all you're doing all season is, like, training and building, and you're not sort of getting the juices flowing that you get at an event, I think it's going to be difficult. So I would say that, obviously, if you're comfortable, I would say, one of the big positives about Georgia First is that they are being very aggressive about, requiring masks, really limiting the number of people. There's no audience. They've cut down on their volunteers. So I think Georgia First is doing it right. And I think, like, I would personally say that if I have a team, I would lean towards we sort of have to compete, because that's what you do, right? You compete. So,
I mean, if you're honest about it, I think competing virtually, right? And I say this just for our team. The reality is, this is the best time that you're going to have out of anything else to basically hone your craft, hone your skill in a realistically controlled environment. Because the reality is, COVID didn't just affect one region, it's affected everyone in the scope of FIRST. And so we're literally, for a lot of these teams, right, you're starting out from ground zero. So, I talked about that Synchronous focused on process and culture. If there's any time to work on your process and culture, it's now. And especially when you're talking about the competition part, if anything, it's, on the team side, I think it's going to be, I think you still compete even if it's virtual. I'm hoping that we get to a point that we can compete in person with masks, everything else, with all the precautions, right? And I think it's important, because this season is going to be one of the ones, if you can survive this season, you figure out your process this season, you're going to be a well-structured team going forward from here. If you can survive here, you're going to be able to survive when it's normal. But that's the team side. I think on the, like, teams even competing, I think it's very imperative on Georgia First and First in general, just like a lot of the major sports entities have had to do. You have to create an experience that people are going to be excited about. So you're going to have to, so all the money that realistically we're not spending on, doing a lot of the stuff we would normally do at competitions, we got to hike up the production value. Like, we need a lot more cameras. We need a lot more content to deal with, which is what Georgia First is really interested in, because we want to start now so that when it gets to the point of these competitions, that we have readily available play-by-play analysis available for people, so that it feels like you're in a real sports event. And like I said with the teams thing, if we're figuring it out now with the production items to basically raise it, when we get out of all this junk, we're going to have such a polished product that it's not just going to be a great thing for recruitment of students to come into FIRST. It's going to be a great thing for recruitment of sponsors, because it's going to feel like a real sport for people when they see it.
And it's part of what Kyle was saying. I think an incredible difficulty for the teams of Georgia First, wherever in First, is going to be harnessing and maintaining any amount of enthusiasm. And it's really difficult to do that because we while there are some details about what virtual competitions are going to look like, that Georgia First is doing their best to host in-person events, there's still a lot of unknown. So I think it's important for teams to pick out a couple of things that they know they're going to be working on, regardless of what that spring semester is going to look like. On if there are actually in-person events, or if you are or are not competing in the virtual events, pick out a project that starts you in that direction. That if you want to work on your 2020 robot and improve it, start working on it. But yeah, harnessing and maintaining that excitement's a big deal. And again, hitting on a lot of the same nails that Kyle was hitting on is if you already have a 2020 robot, and aren't rebuilding a brand new robot, this is a perfect opportunity to apply the same build season concept that you'd usually use on a robot to your team. So you're saying, instead of how do we build the best robot to play this game and shoot power cells into the goal or climb at the end of the match, instead you're asking those same questions about how your team can best perform its purposes. So you're saying, all right, what's our team structure look like? All right, what's our team culture look like? So you're asking all those same design questions about your team instead of your robot. So I think that's a huge a huge area that teams can really focus on during these uncertain times. But yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
So looking at it from the team side, I really like the innovation challenge and the game design challenge for a couple of reasons. The at home, and then if we get the in-person competitions, it's going to be different, right? It's not going to be the same competition. So, the students are going to have a little different experience. But when it comes to the other two, one of the things I really like about the game design challenge is you can allow students to sort of get in there and sort of what game do you like? What were the things you liked about previous games? It also helps if you got a strategy team trying to research what common elements are in things, right? And then you can sort of spin that a little bit bigger than that and say, okay, so here our strategy team came up with this game, right? Well, have some of your other students on the build side come up and CAD a virtual robot that might play that game, right? So you could start having this whole new brainstorm idea where it's all new ideas, instead of just well, we saw this last year, so we need to put this on our new bot. So I think it's a real good experience in that aspect. And for the innovation one, it's really great for those teams that are doing a lot of outreach, because a lot of times FIRST was all about what are you doing for chairmen inside the FIRST community? And this allows those teams to think beyond FIRST. And they could actually, if they're really interested in outreach, can look at trying to have a large lasting impact outside of just FIRST.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's actually very interesting. You mentioned that piece about going back and looking at new games, going back and looking at old games, because that's something I hadn't really considered, but it's something that I really believe in, that it's one of the most valuable things that you can do for any team member is go look at old games. So in that aspect, I think it's pretty good to explore, what are the mechanics that worked? What are the mechanics that didn't? I was thinking about a game design where you have regolith and you have tote stacking and you have mini bots, just get all those terrible aspects into a game and see how far you can get with that. So yeah, I mean that's interesting to see. My question is with these skill challenges, right? I still feel we haven't gotten a ton of detail on that. And, in Vex, they do it proper, because you can get a field for $5 and you can set it all up. Vex is like doing a skill challenge at home wouldn't be all that challenging.
Mhm.
But in FRC, I think the biggest challenge for teams, you need space.
Yeah.
So I think FRC has said that you will need like a quarter field worth of space, which if you're working out of classrooms and things like that, I don't know like how you come up with that, right?
Yeah.
I'd be curious if districts or regionals would kind of come up with a shared community space that they'd be able to set up a field and leave
Yeah.
it there to an extended amount of time, just for teams to be able to cycle in or sign up for a couple hours to come in and record their videos for the challenge and then head out. But
Kyle, do you
I
know if Georgia First is planning on doing something like that for destination or the DE event, DE fields?
I haven't talked specifically with Connie about it, but from what I've heard in terms of what they're thinking about with D in general, I think that once we figure out the game plan in terms of honestly how we handle the dynamics of teams coming in and out of a facility and sharing that space, that I think that the D fields will most likely be an integral part of how we do this next season. I'll put it this way. I think Georgia First is going to try to bring a sense of normalcy as much as they can into the experience for the students, which means I think there's going to be investment in making sure that DE is going to be readily accessible, because DE has been a very integral part in terms of the evolution of our different teams because of that accessibility to that space. So I would imagine that DE will be used, and it looks like in terms of Columbus, they're still using their DE site, and they're actively in it currently right now to do their own stuff. I also wouldn't be surprised in terms of the DE Atlanta site. I know that they have done stuff down there already, so I think it's just a matter of time before we hear an update from Georgia First specifically on how the DE spaces are going to be utilized, especially now with at least with Marietta. Now we're going to have the private spaces from 4910 and from 1002. But then it looks like as well 2974 also has their space as well. So I think we're going to have a multitude of spaces available in the north, in actual Atlanta, and then in South Georgia.
Yeah, and Alliance Academy up here in Cumming, Georgia, has their STEM gym, so I imagine they'll be able to open that up for teams in the northern part of the northern exurbs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So on that, I'd heard midsummer that Gwinnett County was looking at trying to restrict people coming in from outside of the school to use the facility. Have you heard anything about school systems being open to like a bunch of people from all over Atlanta coming to their school?
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, I haven't personally heard anything like that, but I imagine if word gets out that people from Dalton are coming down to that STEM gym, and word gets around, and God forbid that somebody actually gets infected at one of those events, then I imagine that's going to shut it all down very quickly. And
I think JRD, the Atlanta facility and ECR's facility, where they're more of a community thing, right? They're not a school system.
Right.
That becomes easier.
Yeah. So speaking from like the school system side, we've been told by our county, like in general, we can't travel out of state this year. And then we have like limitations on who can come to our schools as guests as well. I don't know if there's a specific policy about outside entities in general, because again, football games are happening still. So I imagine there's like a whole different thing for like extracurricular activities or sports.
Yeah. And I think it's easier for something like football where, it is outside. But then I think when we get more into, let's say, honestly, the basketball season and things like that, we'll probably see a little bit more in terms of the regulations, because I think a lot more of the regulations when you're dealing with indoor sports, everything else, are going to kind of apply to what we're going to try to do with robotics in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting to see. But so just to summarize, for the virtual events, you'll have the Innovation Challenge, you'll have the skills challenge, and you'll have the game design. So, whether or not your team wants to do those are available, right? So the next thing is the way we have restructured our in-person competitive events, right? So the rest of this discussion is going to be mostly hypothetical because none of this has been confirmed, right? But right now, Georgia First is looking at doing 8 events that would be spread across sort of 2 locations. And, it would be 8 one-day events, right? And so the real question is, if you intend to go and compete, how do you strategize around going to these events? Because now it's not, 4 districts, it's 8 mini events. You could go back to back, you could do whatever. So what are some of y'all's thoughts about how to pick off some of these events?
The game plan never changes. Play the district. That's it.
Which is really unique in this situation because playing the district's one thing, and I know between 1746, I know Ignite has done this in the past. I don't know 1002 so much, but we've a number of occasions we've started out really poorly at our first event, and we very quickly scrambled to come up with this district point calculator on how well we need to do at our second event and at state championships in order to know if we're getting a spot at state champs or not.
Yeah.
So I think with 18 team events, if you're looking, if you have four alliances of 3, you're looking at 12 of 18 teams making elims. But with how district points would be spread out, there would be 3 times 8, so 24 unique, or not necessarily unique, but 24 event champions from all of the 8 events.
Right.
But you only have 18 spots at a state championship event, which is a huge twist compared to the normal 45 you'd have. So it would take that district point counting methodology to a whole nother level, to make sure you're because if you're signing up for 2 events, you got to show up and play at those things to get all the district points you're going to need.
Yeah.
Like, that's an interesting point. Like, before, we had 5 district events. If you were on the winning alliance, you were almost guaranteed a spot at the district championship. Now it's like you have to win, but you have to be at least the first robot picked on that alliance, maybe, and you have to still do well at your next event.
Very much.
So let me ask this question just to the group. So recognizing how important it is to kind of show up at both of your events, right? How badly would you go after picking a non-competitive event? Like would you be willing to travel south, potentially stay in a hotel, just so you can go to an event that is less competitive than what you might see in Atlanta?
How confident are we? That's the question, though.
How confident are you in?
Well, you're assuming we can drive south because now you're, for that, then students actually have to stay overnight and stuff like that. It's a real long day, right? I would kind of expect there might be some sort of cohorting going on, like you're in these regions and you can select these events broadly. But as far as what you're trying to do, we always try to qualify for Worlds, right? That's how do we get there? With Worlds probably not happening, and what's, our goals change, and trying to just be in the right point position to get to Worlds is a lot different than what do we need to do at states, because the awards are now virtual, and so it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that was a very long non-answer.
So,
well, I don't. How am I supposed to know? I mean, it's like, all right, I know in a normal season, 205 points. That's my target. I can put that out. You're like, okay, it's totally different. I'm not gonna tell you what it is, but give me your opinion.
Yeah.
So here's the thing: you can do this season. I wouldn't say that this season's a mulligan, but I do kind of agree with Brian. The reality is, I don't think that there's going to be a world championship. So I think when you go into the play the district model, it's a real thing of, okay, if you're confident, right, that you're focusing is I just want to get to the state championship. That's going to be my end of season. Oh dear Lord, there we go. The end of season. I just need to get to the state championship. The state championship is going to be my world championship. If that's what I care about, then yeah, I'm going to go for the easy event. I'm going to go and just like, all right, let me just go to these events. I know that there's not going to be enough. There's not going to be these good teams there, but I know without a doubt that we're going to be able to get the points that we need, and then we're ready for state championships. But then on the other side, if I know that if there's a world championship, which means that you need to be competitive, you need to be ready out the gate, then yeah, you have to go through the gauntlet. So I would literally load up on the Marietta events. If I know 2974, if I know 1746, if I know 4910 is going to be there, I'm going to put myself in that event and I'm going to go through a slugging match, 15 rounds, so I can make sure that if there's a world championship, I'm ready to go.
See, but to me, that is like still older mindset, because
yeah,
in the past, like the filter from districts to district championships wasn't this narrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like you could go to a slugfest and wash out in quarterfinals, and like you probably be okay.
Right.
But I would say if you go to a slugfest here and like you go out in, even if you're a finalist, you better start counting those points, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
so
like,
normally we have the 85 teams cutting down to 45 for
Yeah.
state champs, and now we're cutting down to 18. So you're looking at a 75% cut of the field.
Yeah.
Just
But-
going to state champs.
And, like,
so it's-
especially for teams in Atlanta and teams in this area, like the number one thing is going to be, will their school districts or school systems allow them to stay in hotels to go down south? And if they aren't, will they be able to get all the logistics for that together? And that's going to be what we're going to ask our folks first is like, would you be comfortable if we wanted to sign up for 2 events in the South, would you be comfortable with you sending your kid to stay in a hotel and not be at home during this pandemic?
So
we could do a team camping trip just to stay out of school.
So here's the other question, right? And let's be honest. We asked this question earlier in the show, and I think it even applies to this in terms of strategy, right? How many teams are going to be in this next season where it's good? This is actually a realistic question. Let's be honest. How many teams are going to fall to attrition? And because I think, let's be honest, I think the 18 teams in terms of the state championships make sense, because I think that there's going to be teams, and I'm saying this, God forbid, I really hope that we keep the majority of teams. But I think that there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to go to the wayside because of regulations and everything else. Parents wanting to make sure that their kids are protected. There's going to be a lot of robotics teams that are not going to be competing this year and may not be coming back because of interest. But that's going to be a thing of how that plays into the teams that you're going to have to worry about as well.
Yeah. So that's a very good question, and I will start by answering that. First has like 18 teams, 8 events. That is capacity for 72 teams, right? That's like just the capacity, right? So even if, say, you get 60 teams, right? 18 over 60 is still nowhere close to like half of what we would see in previous seasons, right? So like you would need to come down to like 30, 40 teams in order to be at that consideration that you're like, oh, okay, now it's about as competitive, right? But even if you think about like 30, 40 teams, right? So like, let's say that crap absolutely hits the fan and that's all we have this year, right? I mean, think about the 30, 40 teams that are going to be around, right? Like they're going to be the biggest, they're going to be the strongest, they're going to be the most like teams that have the most resources, right? So, like it's sort of like you like took the cream off the top and you're like, now these 30 and 40 are left, and now you guys have to get in. Even though it's still the same ratio of 50%, it's like a thicker 50% you have to get through. So, you know, it's an interesting consideration.
Yeah.
You know,
It's like last year we were hyped up for Carrollton because of all the heavy hitters, but will you be as hyped up this year to have to go up against all those top teams and potentially have your state championship chances on the line?
Yeah, and on that point, you know, Kyle mentioned confidence. I don't think there's a single team in our district that should be confident about going into a team packed with powerhouses and coming out with a win. Like,
oh yeah,
and like I'm talking about Walton, I'm talking about 4910, I'm talking about 1771. You know, you might get to semis, you might get to finals, but I don't think anybody should be like, oh, don't worry, we're going to go and we're going to win. I would not do that kind of confidence for any team in our district right now. So,
I wouldn't.
Think,
yeah.
Come on.
No, I was going to say I wouldn't, but I know, like, let's be honest. I think that, you know, in terms of the rising, I wouldn't say, I won't use the word ego, but I will use the word confidence. The rising confidence in Georgia First in terms of their teams, everything else. You're going to have some teams are going to be like, nah, we want the smoke. I want all the smoke. Let's go for it. We're confident that we're going to get through this. Now, is that smart? No. Let's be honest. I think that we're dealing literally with a pandemic that means that all cards are off the table in terms of what's normal and what's expected. So, like, it could be go multiple ways.
What I can tell you is if this whole thing pans out and the 18 best teams in Georgia qualify for state champs, that's going to be a heck of an event. Because normally Grits only has 30 teams? I'm trying to think. I guess some districts have only had like 25 teams or something like that in the past. But talking about that amount of teams, that you're talking about the best teams, you're talking about, yes, you'd only have the, 8 qualifying rounds or whatever they're planning for these full day events. But you're talking about playing every other match with the best teams in the state. So if it all pans out, there's will be some crazy matches to watch.
I don't think it's going to pan out that smoothly. Because there are two main concerns, right? One is how do the other awards play in, right? So how do chairman's and engineering inspiration play in, right? Second is how do these virtual awards play in, if at all, right? Mm-hmm. So you have some team that did really well in the game design. Now they show up with their robot for district championships, and like they took 1746 spot, right? So that's one thing. And the second thing is if you have events that are being stacked because, you know, teams are being region locked and they can't travel down south, you know, there is, you know, it's very clear that a lot of the stronger teams are up north, right? They are in the Atlanta area. So if those teams are clustered into the same events, you're going to kind of have like a 50-50 best teams from the north, but then the best teams from the south. So it'll still be good, but you won't get that true like straight top 18 teams, right? So it's something to keep in mind.
I can hope.
Yeah, listen.
The fun part is going to be the fun part's going to be at states having like 1 hour to do your alliance selection.
Oh yeah, I mean,
who do you choose?
I mean,
what do we do here?
Yeah, so like the alliance selection, I think, is one component of a bigger problem that teams are going to feel is that you have no time to do anything. Like you don't have time to make significant repairs. You don't have time to think between matches. If you're doing 18 teams, it means on average you're playing every 3 matches, right? Mm-hmm. That's on average. You could have some matches where you're back to back. 2 matches, maybe you're doing like 4 or 5. So, you know, I played at Albany a few years ago, and there were 24 teams, I think. And I distinctly remember in the middle of that event, just like something was wrong, and we were like rushing, and like I distinctly remember thinking like, oh my God, this pace is crazy. Why does anybody ever come to Albany? Mm-hmm. So if you're doing 18 teams, that's going to be crazy as well. So
well, one of the things on the pit list would be how many batteries do you have?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to make sure you've got like 3 or 4 matches worth of batteries ready on hand at once.
Yeah.
And I'd probably
There are going to be situations, multiple situations at each of those events where you're playing in the immediate next match.
I honestly think, and this is the sports side of me talking, that there's going to be instances of load management when it comes to these matches. If you're having to go back and basically be basically every 3 matches, there's going to be load management. There's going to be a necessity of like being able to have either a drive team that can handle the endurance of these back-to-back matches, or being able to honestly rotate out your drivers, like pulling people off a bench and literally like load management.
Like on the fly, like you have like 15 people there, but like 5 people like hot swap.
Yeah, listen,
I don't know.
like,
Make a point. 1625, the team I was on in Illinois as a high schooler, we had during our rookie year, I think we had 4 different drive teams. So
yeah, listen, I even know for our strategy mentor for 1002 now, Thomas, his plan is to literally just run through with like 2 drive teams and just to be ready and be able to switch them out easily.
Yeah.
And like,
Kyle, here's like an idea that you might consider taking back to our Georgia First overlords is like, rather than trying to play all the events, like
praise be.
so rather than trying to play all the matches like every 7 minutes back to back to back, why not do them in bursts of 3, right? Mm-hmm. So that you have like 3 back to back very quickly, like as soon as you feel reset, go, right? But then between the bursts of 3, you take a little bit of a longer break, like 10, 15 minutes, so that if you have a back-to-back match, you get that little bit of wind down, you get to go back to your pit, you can come back, but then you burst the 3 again, right? So
I don't hate that idea. It sounds like it could work. It's a question of I think it could work. It's just in terms of how, like, I think Georgia First would like the idea. It's a question of if depending on how much autonomy First gives the individual districts in terms of like how they handle it. If we can say to like Ray, like, hey Ray, let's do it in spurts. That way we can do this idea instead, and how First would respond to basically the autonomy between the different regions in terms of how we're handling the match schedule. But I like the idea in general. And I think if we proposed it, Connie, I think, is on the what's the term? I think she's on it's a committee basically in terms of how they come back from COVID basically. So I think if we literally brought that to her, I think that could be something in consideration that First could consider.
Yeah, it's just food for thought,
like,
you know.
One thing this might enable, or one thing that could help, is like getting your drive teams practice to perform under that pacing. So maybe have some drills where you're simulating matches and simulating being in like back-to-back matches, or being in like a match after the next, and kind of getting your drive team and pit crew to swap batteries, do all that testing, and then get back onto wherever you're practicing.
So in terms of experience though, so what would that look like? So realistically, we're talking about, an event where majority of the event experience is going to be through a TV screen or a computer screen. How does that look in terms of a burst of how, I think the terms of on-screen personalities, right? For me, it would probably switch from being just like an MC in GA to being more play-by-play in terms of like what we're doing more now. So how would that look like in terms of being able to convey that experience in terms of the bursts?
Could you?
I said that to you guys. Yeah, saying stream-wise.
Well, could you sort of like the 8-second delay they have for football, right? Could you live stream and then buffer, right? And so that it's predictable every 3 minutes for the viewer, right? but it's burst for the participants.
You could.
That's a good idea. I mean, I think that might be a little intense to try and execute. Like, I'm just generally. I think it's one of those things that as a viewer, I'm not always constantly glued to my screen, right? Like, I know that there's going to be 5 or 6 minutes between events, and there are typically only a handful of teams that I want to watch anyways. Like, I'm not looking to watch like every single match. So I think as a viewer, if I know those bursts are coming, that I know that, hey, now I have a 10-minute break, I can go get some, I can go get a Coke, I can go make a snack, and I can come back in 10 minutes, then I'm like prepared, right? And as a viewer, I get a break as well, right? Like sitting on my couch watching all these robot events, it can be a little tiring at times. So
Oh my gosh.
And like, let's talk scouting too at that. I think those 10-minute or those little bursts would help with, like, you have a couple matches, your scouts who are watching online can now debrief and maybe get all that data collected and update your rankings. And that way, rather than doing everything in an hour between alliance selection, you are kind of working throughout the day and you have that time built in.
So in this case, do you think that actually, well, this is going to be more a thing for Georgia First. I think it's going to be really important for Georgia First, not just to have the cameras, but to be consistently uploading video, because we're literally creating the next model of First. So quite literally, okay, as soon as that 3 match burst happens, all right, we're going to upload the video, and scouts can now realistically take a look at the match video.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Georgia First does that already at some of the events. Like, the video is usually available very, very quickly after.
You always got to give props to the Georgia First AV crew for getting those matches recorded and uploaded in such a timely manner. That's a huge thing for any region of First to have.
It's
I'm a
amazing.
fan of that Georgia First AV crew.
It's amazing to like be able to watch these matches, and like it really helps to look at like how your team could have done better. It really just the AV crew is like almost single-handedly helping us elevate our play to some degree with that.
So like on that point, I actually want to transition to like our next major point is just running a competition or like competing at an event with only 5, 6 students and 2 adults, right? Because one of the things that I sort of built out with my larger teams is that everybody has a very targeted role, right? So when you're going from an infrastructure that relies on 30, 40 students down to 5, right? Like the way it was positioned in the meetings was you get your drive team +1, right? And I think that's the absolute wrong way to look at it, is you have to take 6 students into the competition that can drive your robot and also, keep it up and running, like make improvements and adapt, right? So that's why the whole video thing is like one of the things that I think is kind of interesting, because typically after a match, I would review match footage with my drive team, right? So somebody would record it from the stands, and then they would just bring that footage down with them on an iPad, and we would watch it right there, right? I think even if Georgia First is on their game, like immediately uploaded, it takes time for YouTube to upload, process, right? I don't know if I could rely on that.
And I don't think you should, because the reality is, we talked about it in the MAC meeting, but I think it's going to be important. This entire experience is all going to rely on the internet access that's available at these 2 venues. Now, Cobb County, if it's Cobb County and we're thinking like the Galleria, things like that, I'm thinking because I would have to ask someone like Ben, or honestly someone like, or obviously Connie, but I would think that the internet connection there is going to be good enough that we'll be able to handle not only just streaming in general, but also think about it. It's not just the stuff that's going out now, it's the stuff that's coming in. Each of the teams, because we're talking about 5 to 6 students, you're going to be dealing with like things that need to go back. Like Brian earlier in the summer showed me something in terms of like programming with like Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code, you can do remote remote programming or pair programming, basically. So literally now, technically, you can have your programming mentor, programming team off-site or part of them off-site so that you can basically conserve your numbers. But that does mean that you're going to have basically, in theory, 18 connections that are going to be coming into a facility, as well as individual streams coming into a facility, because I would guess that majority of those teams are going to try to have a webcam or something set up in their pits so that people can see in there and see what's going on, just in case a specific build member is not available to be there in person. So you can't depend on a reliable connection and reliable content coming out readily. You're gonna have to either get some hotspots. You're gonna have to figure it out in a real and different way to do this.
Kyle, are you telling us we can have Wi-Fi in the pits?
No. Listen. You're gonna have Ross Lindsay just like he's gonna be there in a mask, and he will be there to find the people with Wi-Fi, and he will find you. Yeah. I trust Ross.
Set him up as wired connections, though, right?
I mean, you could definitely.
Yeah, but Brian, I think you were about to say something.
Yeah, like one of the things that I was talking about with our programming mentor, I'm like, we need to practice, since we can't be there right now. You need to be able to deploy your code over an Android phone, right? It's tethered to a laptop, right? And so that we can do this stuff like that. But I think, as far as who I would bring, coach and driver are sort of the two that I would count on. And depending on your team, if you're, like some of the top teams, they probably have their programming locked down pretty good, right? And so I probably focus on pit people. But if you're really doing major changes, that's could be hard anyway, just because of the fast turnaround times. The biggest thing I'm looking for is, if we have connectivity problems, who do I have that can solve connectivity problems? And that might not be a student, it might be which mentor do I need to have to make sure that we can connect.
Yeah. I mean, so like, this is something we talked about a bit, but like, it's sort of one of those things that when it comes to mechanical, it's not as specialized as people imagine, right? So like, even if you have a student who knows all about the intake mechanism, they have good knowledge, but most mechanical leads can very quickly look at a mechanism, realize how it works, and triage it if you need it, right? But most mechanical people can't do that for programming, right? Like you might be able to teach them how to deploy code and do some very basic testing, but I've been at events where code is literally being written at the same time, and while we are at the events, there's 3 programming mentors, 2 programming students. We're all like, what is this thing doing, right? So I would personally not send my team in without a programming mentor and a programming student, right? I think no matter how good that gets, no matter how good the connection is, if crap hits the fan, and nobody there can program, it's game over. It's no idea what to do. Somebody calls somebody.
So here's my thing though. So if you think about the numbers, right? So in your scenario, you have a programming mentor there that takes out one person, right? You have to hope that the other mentor that's there can also be handling admin and maybe mechanical, right? Or because one of those mentors will be at an admin type of mentor or teacher, right?
Yeah, they got to handle logistics, bringing food to the students and signing the team in, and they have to serve as the emergency contact for any of the students there as well.
And especially with everything happening with COVID and all this stuff, there's going to be a lot of responsibility on those two. So realistically, you're a big part, I think, of what's going to be important in the season is being able to cross-train, right? I think programming mentor is definitely important, but I'd almost say, is programming being there since you're talking about, something that, like I said, if you can get a connection, then you can do it. The question is, can you gamble with having that being a requirement that you need a programming mentor there? Or even on the other side, can you gamble with just a mechanical mentor?
Yeah, I'd almost say that, just like in the students, you really don't want just a mentor who's a build mentor, right? You really want somebody that has their feet in both sides. And we have a couple of mentors like that, right? So if you really don't have that, it puts you in a tough situation.
Sure.
And
I mean, one of the things we haven't considered, and I think it might pop up in a rule or something, is like hot swapping people that are physically inside the building, right? So like, if you have an event that's in Marietta, you have a lot of mentors that live close by. You could say like, hey, we're having a programming issue, so like the main idea is you have two people in the building, but you could have 4 or 5 loitering outside, and whenever you need one of them, they come in.
I think that and I thought about hot swapping earlier. The problem with that idea is, and this is, and COVID kind of will bring in all these new type of conditions. Here's the reality. I'm going to bet that the two mentors or 2 adults allowed, in terms of that, the condition of them being there, is that it's not going to be someone that can just come in and out. If you're coming in, you're in, and then you're there, I think, because it's a safety thing at the end of the day, because you want to make sure, because I'm trying to remember if I think it was Klein that was mentioning this, right? Like, you're going to be going to the competition, you're going to have your temperature check, you're going to have all these different things to just be able to go in. And even at that point, right, it's the possibilities, right? You're in essence going to have to put yourself in a theoretical bubble to make sure that, for example, if you're for whatever 2 weeks or whatever else, to basically make sure that, okay, if you want a hot swap, cool, you go in, you have your temperature checked, fine, you're good. You want to hot swap someone out, they come out, the other person comes in. They also have to pass the test to make sure that they're good to go. Because if anyone fails in terms of, an error with temperature or anything like that, that entire hot swap plan fails immediately.
Mm-hmm.
New idea: have your practice robot in the parking lot with the brain
There we
trust
go.
out there. Replicate your issue on the practice bot. Say, this is what we're dealing with, and take the solution back in.
There we go.
Bada bing, bada boom.
I think what's going to be the most realistic scenario is teams are going to evaluate where they are like a couple of days or even the night before competition and be like, this is what I hope teams would do, is these are where our points of failure have been throughout our practice. This is where we might need to do some improvement here. Let's kind of, based on what we see, let's submit this roster to go. Like, if we're having mechanical issues but all of our programming is kind of intact, let's maybe...
Where is our robot most likely to break?
Yeah, right.
Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Do we know if there's going to be a change in pits? Like, now we're going to have 20 by 20 pits, so we have spacing? Because if they give 20 by 20 pits with only 18 teams, you could literally say mentors have to stay in their pit, right? So that way any hot swapping doesn't introduce any other contacts to other teams.
That is possible. I mean, so I would think, and this is actually coming from another robotics competition that's happening right now. I think BattleBots is starting production right at the moment. And one of our friends is currently actually competing in that bubble.
There too.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so here's the thing. They changed the pit structure. So instead of, the normal 10 by 10 and things like that, and they're smaller and they're constrained, now they're dealing with 15 feet and it's 20 feet between the pits. And so the thing about that, I think you're going to find a model more like that, where you're going to have a lot more space in between each of the pits. That's going to be adequate enough. So I think you're going to see a size increase of something like 15 by 15. You could go 20 by 20, and that'd be really interesting, but I think it's going to be more like 15 by 15.
Yeah. If you had 20 by 20, at that point, you don't need a practice field, right?
Nah, you just... But yeah, I think it'll mirror that.
Yeah. So, I mean, That'll be interesting to see. I mean, I personally don't like, for the sake of safety and contact tracing, I don't think it makes sense to allow teams to like go in and out all that much. So that part is there. But I can imagine there's like folks that want to provide some like equity to students. You know, they're like there's only 5 people, so maybe they're like, hey, we'd like to bring in a second group of 5 later in the day, something like that, right? But actually, the like point that I was originally going to make on Anupam about how like people like think on the fly, like, oh, this like mechanism's like more likely to break. I think that's a good idea, but I think it's also wishful thinking. Like, I think, you know, like, because I can think like back to some of my experiences, like even if there's a mechanism that's kind of sketch, usually there is a couple of students who you can say like this student will be able to handle most of what gets thrown at them, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that like sounds very smart. It's like, oh, we're going to make the decision on the fly and things like that. But I wonder if that's going to open you up to just more unnecessary stress, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Well, like if you're set programming wise, all your mechanisms are dialed in, or all your PID gains are dialed in and everything, maybe you don't need as much programming help there on site if you don't envision having to do much. But maybe you want to take some more mechanic. I don't know.
I have never been in that situation where programming is all dialed in and everything is good to go.
Yeah,
it sounds like a nice place. How do you get there?
Yeah, let us know. Let us know how that feels.
Step 1.
Wait, that's right. I'll say, is it week 1, the first day of programmers? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how we've done it like 1 or 2 of the last couple of years.
Yeah. So on that whole who you're taking thing, is anybody looking at trying to lean towards seniors because of the fact that juniors, they didn't really get much of experience, and this is their last go round?
I haven't thought about that.
That's a good point.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I mean, it really depends, right? You know, at the end of the day, you know, I would say, you know, the first priority is the kids. It's the first priority is the students and everything else. And so you want to be able to give like seniors that experience. But, you know, it's the balance of, you know, are we bringing the kids in just for the experience itself, or are we thinking holistically about the team? Because the reality is I know a lot of seniors that, you know, that are usually, you know, they're playmakers, but what we've also found, like in our team, we have a lot more juniors that are basically the shot callers on this team. They're the ones that I would honestly bring in over a senior, even though I want the senior to be able to have that experience. You know, the goal holistically for our team, our vision is to win. Then that's the kind of balance. At the end of the day, I want everyone to be able to experience it. But if we're honest, like the actual venue, the actual competition itself is not where we're going to find the majority of the experience. It's going to be outside. And so I don't think it's going to be important to the seniors. It's going to be important to, in general, like win, just to win.
I'll just want some blue banners. Like that's it. It's like,
dude, I want a blue banner. Okay. And that's the thing. I'm trying not to be that guy that's just like, you know what? I want to like, you know, like it doesn't matter. I'm doing whatever it takes to win. I'm not that guy. But on the other hand, like, you know, when you have students that are just like, at the end of the day, we have a united vision of like, we want to win. There's going to be people there's going to be the people on your team that realize about sacrifice, right? Like for me, I know personally, you know, I may be a head coach, but I know that in reality, if it is the 5 to 6 students and 2 adults allowed, I can easily teach someone else and I'll put someone else in that place for me, because I know that I want to make sure that we have the resources available. Same thing for a lot of our other students. Like I'm glad that I have self-aware students that recognize, you know, when you may not be the best person to do something. And that's what you need in general, not just in FIRST, but in any type of environment when you're dealing with a team. You need to be self-aware of what you're good at and what you're not good at. and being able to say, like, I'm going to abdicate to my role to someone else so that we holistically can win. So
yeah, that's a good point. All right. On that note, that brings us to the end of the show, but going to go around the horn. Quick thoughts, closing thoughts. Let's start it off with Anupam G. Quick thoughts, closing thoughts.
Stay safe out there. Do things virtually if you can. If you need to do it in person, make sure that you're wearing your mask, social distance, wash your hands, sanitize, and stay safe.
All right, Kellen.
I guess in this current state where we don't know a lot of things, I'd pick some concrete goals for your team of what you want to accomplish, things you know you can accomplish, and start chasing those things. Don't wait for, I guess, other people to make up their minds in order for you to decide if you're pursuing certain things. Especially if we want to keep your team engaged, I'd pick a couple of goals and start pursuing them. And stay safe out there.
Kyle.
One is the game design challenge is a pyramid scheme from the game design committee. They're trying to steal your ideas. Do not buy into it. I'm telling you right now, do not buy into it. Okay, send them all Watergate memes. Don't give them anything. Okay,
It sounds like Kyle is clearing the field so that his team can submit a design.
No, listen. I don't care about 1002 at this point. Listen, I'm trying to get onto the game design committee. Okay, listen, this is Galaxy Brain. This is Galaxy Brain moment, right?
So don't take your job. Okay.
No, but no. In a serious point though is like we said earlier in the show, this entire experience from March when the season was canceled to even now. The reality of this is if you can build a culture and process that can survive the mist of a worldwide pandemic, and you build that even in this next season, you will come out as a much stronger organization in general. So do not take this time and this experience for granted.
Cool. All right, Ryan?
I would say with the year we have coming up, mentors and the veterans, I think, have a really big impact on how exciting their season can be with some of the aviation challenges and the game design stuff. So look at how you can make that fun so you have a good season.
Cool. All right, my thing will be, hide your banners, hide your medals, because Kyle's coming for them all, apparently.
Oh, God.
So yeah, so that's going to be my closing note. All right, so
COVID's coming for them all, too.
Oh, my God. Come on, man. Come on. Too soon.
Oh, wow. Too soon.
All right. I think on that note, we're going to end the show. So please stay safe. Try and have fun this season, okay? We'll talk to you guys later.
All right.